Lucas buys a rental property. Aibbie puts the same money into index funds. They both walk away thinking they made the smarter move. Here's the thing, they're both missing something. One of them never counted his hours, the other never counted the zeros. And when you actually run the numbers across 20 years, what you find will catch you off guard. Let's make this fair from the start. Lucas and Aibbie grew up in the same town. They went to the same kind of schools, work similar jobs, and both managed to save up $40,000. Same starting line. The only difference, what they do with that money. Lucas uses his $40,000 as a down payment on a $200,000 house, a simple 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. He gets a 30-year mortgage at 7% interest. His monthly payment comes out to about $1,070. He finds a tenant who's happy to pay $1,500 a month. On paper, that's $430 a month in profit before anything goes wrong. Lucas feels like a genius. Aibbie takes her same $40,000 and puts it into a simple index fund, the kind that tracks the whole stock market. No houses, no tenants, no keys to hand over. She sets up an automatic transfer of $250 a month and basically forgets about it. When her friends ask what she's investing in, she says, index funds. They nod and move on. Nobody's throwing a party for her. On day one, Lucas has a house, a tenant, and a great story for the weekend barbecue. Aibbie has a brokerage account and a confirmation email. It's not even close in terms of how it feels, but feelings and math are two very different things. The first few years feel amazing for Lucas. Rent comes in every month like clockwork. He drives past the house on his way to work and thinks, I own that. He's writing off mortgage interest on his taxes. He's building equity with every payment. The neighborhood's home values are slowly creeping up. Aibbie? She checks her account once every few months. Her $40,000 grows to maybe $44,000 in year one, then $48,000, then $53,000. Nothing feels exciting. There's no key in her pocket, no asset she can point to, just a number on a screen that moves slowly. Lucas's friends are impressed. Aibbie's friends don't even know what she's doing. Let's look at the real numbers after 3 years. Lucas has collected about $54,000 in rent. His mortgage payments total around $38,500. That leaves roughly $15,500 in gross cash flow. Sounds great, right? Not so fast. Property taxes, about $2,400 a year. Home insurance, $1,200 a year. He's already had to replace a busted water heater, $1,000, fix a small roof leak, $2,200, and deal with one empty month between tenants. That's $1,500 in lost rent, plus $500 to clean and relist, and Lucas manages the property himself to save money. That means late-night texts from tenants, weekend repair runs, and coordinating plumbers on his lunch break. It's basically a part-time job he's not getting paid for. After all the real costs, Lucas's actual take-home over 3 years is somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000. A far cry from that $15,500 that looked so good on paper. And that number doesn't count a single hour of his time. Meanwhile, Aibbie has done absolutely nothing, and her portfolio is sitting at around $61,000 thanks to her contributions and roughly 10% average annual market returns. But here's what Lucas does have working for him: leverage. His $200,000 property has gone up maybe 3 to 4% a year and is now worth around $215,000 to $225,000. His equity, what the house is worth minus what he owes, has grown to about $45,000 to $55,000. That's real wealth, and part of it came from using the bank's money. That's the one trick the stock market can't easily copy. Here's what nobody talks about when they hype up rental income. The rent number everyone brags about, at the barbecue, on YouTube, in the podcast, that's the gross number before reality shows up. Vacancy. Most rentals sit empty about 1 month per year. That's a full mortgage payment with zero rent coming in, plus cleaning, repairs, and time spent finding a new tenant. Maintenance. Budget 1 to 2% of the home's value every year for upkeep. On a $200,000 house, that's $2,000 to $4,000 annually. Some years, it's a $150 toilet fix. Other years, it's a $6,000 air conditioning system that dies in the middle of summer and can't wait. Big ticket replacements. Roofs, furnaces, water heaters, they all have expiry dates. And when they go, it's not $500. It's $5,000 to $12,000 in one shot. If you're not putting money aside for these every month, you're not running a business. You're just hoping nothing breaks. Property management. If Lucas hires someone to handle it, that's 8 to 10% of rent gone right away, about $120 to $150 a month. If he does it himself, it's free financially, but it costs him something else: time, energy, and peace of mind. And then there's the one risk nobody likes to talk about: a bad tenant. Someone who stops paying and knows how to drag out the eviction process can cost you 3 to 6 months of lost rent plus legal fees. One bad tenant can wipe out an entire year of profit. None of this shows up in the $430 a month cash flow headline, but it shows up eventually. By year 5, Lucas is deep in landlord reality. He's on his third tenant. He's replaced the roof for $7,500, dealt with a plumbing issue that cost $1,100, and had one more empty month in between. He's raised rent to $1,650, which helps, but his property taxes and insurance crept up too. His actual return on the money he put in? Somewhere around 3 to 5% a year after all real costs. Not bad, but not the 15 to 20% he told everyone about at the cookout. Aibbie is still doing nothing, and her portfolio has grown to around $110,000 to $125,000 by year 7, including her monthly contributions. The compounding is starting to pick up speed. The growth on her growth is now bigger than her contributions. Something is shifting. By year 10, here's where they both stand. Lucas's property is worth roughly $270,000 to $285,000. He still owes about $133,000 on the mortgage. His equity sits around $137,000 to $152,000. After 10 years of costs, mortgage interest, taxes, insurance, repairs, vacancy, and big replacements, he's put in an extra $18,000 to $28,000 beyond the original down payment. Aibbie's portfolio, with her $250 monthly contributions and around 10% average annual returns, is now sitting at roughly $135,000 to $155,000. She put in $40,000 upfront and $30,000 in contributions, $70,000 total. The rest is pure compound growth. She spent 0 weekends fixing anything. At year 10, they're surprisingly close in total wealth. Lucas might have a slight edge thanks to leverage, but Lucas also took on a massive amount of debt, concentrated everything into one house in one neighborhood, and spent hundreds of hours managing it. Aibbie spread her money across thousands of companies and never lost a night of sleep over it. Year 20 is where everything becomes clear. Lucas's house is now worth roughly $360,000 to $400,000. His mortgage is nearly or fully paid off. His equity is somewhere between $330,000 and $400,000 depending on the market. He's been collecting rent for 20 years, but after 2 decades of maintenance, repairs, tenant turnover, taxes, insurance, and at least one big renovation, his total net profit from cash flow might be around $35,000 to $65,000 above what he spent. Could be more in a strong market. Could be less in a flat one. Aibbie's portfolio at 10% average annual returns, with $250 a month in contributions the whole time, somewhere around $340,000 to $380,000. Total contributions, about $100,000. The other $240,000 plus is pure compounding. No debt, no tenants, no middle-of-the-night emergency calls. Net worth at year 20? They're in a similar ballpark, $350,000 to $400,000 each, but how they got there is completely different. Lucas worked for his. Aibbie waited for hers. Lucas had stress, concentrated risk, and money he couldn't touch without selling the house. Aibbie had market swings, but also liquidity. She could access her money anytime without losing the asset. And here's the kicker. If Aibbie just bumped her monthly contribution up by $150, from $250 to $400 a month, her 20-year total jumps to roughly $440,000 to $480,000. In the stock market, small increases in contribution multiply dramatically over time. In real estate, putting in more usually means buying another property, taking on another mortgage, and doubling your workload. But if I only showed you the downsides of real estate, I'd be doing what every finance influencer does with stocks. Index funds have real risks too. Volatility is brutal. In 2008, the market dropped about 37%. In early 2020, it dropped 34% in just a few weeks. If Aibbie had $130,000 saved and watched it fall to $82,000 in a matter of days, that's not just a number on a screen. That's a gut punch. And the research is clear. Most regular investors panic and sell during crashes, then buy back in after prices recover, locking in their losses at the worst possible moment. There's also no monthly cash flow. Index funds don't send you a check. Dividends exist, but we're talking maybe 1.5 to 2% a year. On $150,000, that's about $200 a month. That's not replacing anyone's income anytime soon, and there's no leverage. Aibbie used $40,000 to control $40,000 in assets. Lucas used $40,000 to control $200,000 in assets. That 5-to-1 leverage is powerful when property values rise. And it's one of the main reasons real estate has created more millionaires than the stock market in many studies. Real estate also has a tax advantage called depreciation. Landlords can write off the theoretical decrease in a building's value on their taxes, even when the property is actually going up in value. It's a completely legal tax break that stock investors simply don't have access to. So when does real estate actually win? When the rent-to-price ratio makes sense, meaning the monthly rent is at least 0.8 to 1% of what you paid for the property. In that case, the cash flow math works in your favor from day one. When you treat it like a real business, screening tenants carefully, budgeting for future repairs, building systems that don't depend entirely on you being available 24/7. When you house hack, meaning you live in one unit and rent out the others. Your housing costs drop close to zero while you build equity. The stock market cannot do that. And when you use tools like 1031 exchanges, where you can roll profits from one property into the next without paying capital gains tax right away, that's a wealth-building move the stock market can't replicate outside of retirement accounts. Real estate isn't a bad investment. It's just a badly understood one. Lucas and Aibbie both walked away from that original decision thinking they made the smart choice. Lucas thought real estate was the proven path. Aibbie thought the market would do the heavy lifting for her. Neither of them actually sat down and mapped out what their choice would cost them. In dollars, in time, in stress, and in risk. Over 20 years, the real trap isn't real estate, and it isn't stocks. The real trap is picking either one based on a YouTube thumbnail, a podcast clip, or something a family member said at a holiday dinner, without ever running the full numbers for your specific situation. And if you're curious what happens when you do both, owning property while investing in the market at the same time, that's a completely different story. And the math might surprise you in ways you're not expecting. But for now, the next time someone tells you real estate always wins, or the stock market always wins, ask them one simple question. Did you include everything? Because the only answer that really matters is the one that does.